up guys, Jesse here. So I've been using the Note 20 Ultra for about the past month now, and I'm ready to share my thoughts about it. And spoiler alert, I really like it. Now, if you've been keeping up with the tech news, you probably know that there are some rumors flying around about this possibly being the last Note. Especially with the release of the S21 that has S Pen support, people are kind of wondering what makes the Note different. And personally, I think the Note line has at least one more year to go. But if the rumors do turn out to be true, I'm gonna be very sad because there's just certain things about the Note that no other phone does quite the same. Like, there's just certain things that I think make the Note special, and one of those things is the design. So I feel like the look of the Note 20 Ultra is distinctly of the Note line and pretty evolutionary from last year's version. You've got the same rounded rectangular glass sandwich design as last year's version, except this year they've added Gorilla Glass Victus on the front and back, which should help with durability. It's still got a stainless steel band around the edges, but overall it's a little bit thicker than last year's version, but I doubt you'll be able to tell the difference in hand. Now, one thing I always really loved about the Note line that I'm pretty glad they kept with this year is that the corners are a lot more square than other flagship smartphones. Like, if you look at the S series or even the iPhones, you'll notice that the corners of those screens are just much more rounded than the Note is. And I just feel like the more squared off design of the Note makes it look like it means business a little bit more than those ones. Of course, that is subjective, and I have heard of people complaining that the sharper corners of the Note kind of dig into their hands when they're holding it, but I haven't really run into that, and I just really like it. This year's Note also still keeps the wraparound screen that curves over the edges, and I know a lot of people don't like this feature, but I actually personally don't mind it. I think it hides the side bezels really well, and it almost makes it look like they don't have any. Accidental side touches are still definitely a thing, but I feel like they've got it under control enough to the point that it's not really a problem. The screen has the same camera hole punch cutout as before, but they've actually managed to shrink it pretty noticeably, so it's a lot less intrusive on the actual experience of using the screen. Flip it around though, and you will see the biggest camera bump probably in the history of camera bumps. Now, I could be wrong, but I think it's to house the 5x periscope zoom lens that just takes up a lot of space internally. And I'll talk about the camera system later, but having such a huge camera bump does come with some drawbacks. The first one obviously is if you place it on a flat surface, it's gonna wobble like crazy if you touch it anywhere on the device. And second, if you get a notification while it's laying on a hard surface like a table or something like that, the vibration makes a horrible sound like it's dying or something. And of course, that's entirely subjective, but I just find it so unpleasant to listen to. But if you use a case with your phone, you're not going to run into any of those issues. Now, I don't rock this with a case, and part of the reason for that is this new satin matte finish that they've added to the back. Now, I've said this in previous videos before, but I feel like this is my favorite phone trend of modern times. Like, it just rejects fingerprints super well, which is great for filming, and it also just feels super nice in the hands. One thing to note about this matte finish though is that it's only available in the Mystic Bronze color. And personally, I really like this color, but just be aware that in most lighting situations, it looks pink. Like, anytime I show this to a friend for whatever reason, the first thing they ask me is, why'd you get a pink phone? And whether or not that's a problem is up to you, but personally, I still like it. But if you're not into pink, maybe just go for the black version, but just be aware you're going to be missing out on this wonderful matte glass. Now, one thing about the design that kind of annoys me, and anyone coming from a Note 10 will probably understand my pain, but they've switched the button and S Pen placement. So now all the buttons are on the right side of the device instead of the left, and the S Pen is on the left side instead of the right. And I feel like for right-handed people, this is much worse placement. So the buttons being on the right side are arguably easier to reach than being on the left, but if you're holding the phone in your right hand, it's almost impossible to screenshot with one hand. Like before, you could use your index and middle finger to press the volume down and power buttons, but your thumb is all alone on the right side, so you have to find a way to press both of the buttons with one finger. It is possible with some finagling, but I don't love it. And I also feel like the S Pen being on the left side makes it harder for right-handed people to get the S Pen out. Like, normally you would hold the phone in your left hand and then try to get the S Pen with your right. And with the new pen placement, you're gonna have to shift the phone around in order to get enough clearance to get the pen out. Now, it's really not a big deal, and I'm assuming they did it because they couldn't get the S Pen and that huge camera bump to be on the same side. But I just really wish they could have found a way to keep it the same. Now, while we're talking about the S Pen, it's pretty much the same as last year's. Like if you've used the S Pen in last year's version, you're not really going to notice a huge difference with this year's version. They've lowered the latency down to 9 milliseconds, but to be totally honest, I never really found it to be slow in the first place. But the lower latency combined with this new 120Hz screen makes it truly feel like you're writing just on a piece of paper. Other than that though, it's still pretty much the same S Pen that we all know and love. You can still pull it out while the screen is off just to start taking notes immediately. And also now in the Notes app, you can now search and convert handwritten notes to text. And it's surprisingly good at recognizing bad handwriting. So if you're somebody who takes a lot of handwritten notes on your phone, then this is a great feature to have. Personally though, I really don't use it all that much, mostly just for marking up screenshots or drawing on Instagram stories. While I feel like the S Pen is a really cool feature and it's very impressive that they've been able to fit it inside of the phone, I just feel like it's so short and thin, it's not very comfortable to hold. And while the Note 20 Ultra is a huge phone, it's still a phone, and I find it a little bit cramped for actual handwriting. But if you're someone who has had notes in the past and you already know you love the S Pen, then you can have peace of mind that this is the best S Pen that they've ever put in a note. And this is also the best screen they've put on a note. Like, I already feel like the screen on last year's Note was the best of its generation, and this one just makes it that much better. It's slightly bigger than last year's version, but I really feel like it's so close you wouldn't notice unless anybody told you. Like it's a 6.9-inch 1440p display versus 6.8 inches last year. And being such a big phone, you're gonna have to learn some hand gymnastics just to navigate through the phone one-handed, but once you use it for a while, it's really not too bad and you kind of get used to it. They've also brought back the under-display ultrasonic fingerprint sensor, and it's still a little bit more finicky than I would like. And I still get a lot of failed attempts on this. Like you have to press it with just enough force, like not too much or too little, or else it's just not going to register. I am glad though that it at least has a fingerprint sensor. Like you can use Face Unlock as an alternative, but it's not as secure. And in a world where we have to wear masks pretty much everywhere we go, I feel like the fingerprint sensor is like an essential piece of hardware for a smartphone. Back to the screen though, the actual quality of the panel is incredible and it lives up to Samsung's reputation of making the best screens in smartphones. The colors are vibrant and punchy, it's sharp, and it gets plenty bright even for viewing outdoors. And you also still get the always on display, which I feel like Samsung does better than pretty much anyone else. And I feel like it's one of those things where once you use it for a while, you're gonna miss it a lot if you go to a phone that doesn't have it. I feel like the real kicker with this year's screen though is that it now has an adaptive 120Hz refresh rate screen. And this, I feel like even more so than the always on display, is one of those things where once you try it, you cannot go back. Everything is just so much smoother, and once you go back to a 60Hz phone, it's just gonna feel super choppy. It is worth noting though that this feature only works in 1080p, but I found it to be more than enough resolution for a screen of this size. And the difference between 1080p and 1440p on a screen of this size is much less than the difference between 60Hz and 120Hz. So I feel like the sacrifice of resolution is okay. Like I kept my Note 10 at 1080p anyways, so it's not really anything different here. And overall, this screen is amazing and definitely my favorite part of this phone. The speakers though, I think are just okay. Like they're definitely passable and they do play out of the top and bottom, so it's not easy to block both of them at the same time. And they've also fixed that issue that the Note 10 had where it would kind of start to vibrate once you started to increase the volume to the higher levels. I just wish that it got a little bit louder, but overall, I think for smartphone speakers, they're passable. Okay, now let's talk about specs. And personally, I really don't like to talk about phone specs because I feel like they're probably the least important part of modern smartphones. Because I feel like in this day and age, it just really doesn't matter that much. Like if you buy pretty much any new phone in the past 3 years, it's gonna run anything smoothly. But just for the fans, here they are. It's got a Snapdragon 865 Plus with an Adreno 650 GPU. It's 5G capable, 12 gigabytes of RAM, 128 gigabytes of base storage with expandable micro SD storage, wired charging up to 25 watts, wireless charging up to 15 watts, reverse wireless charging, IP68 water and dust resistance, and a 4500 milliamp hour battery. And long story short, this phone runs great. You're not going to notice any performance dips anywhere. The only spec I feel like people really care about is probably the battery. And of course, it could always be better, but I'm pretty satisfied with the battery life on this device. It is comfortably an all-day battery life, but I feel like the battery drainage is kind of strange on this. Like it'll drain strangely fast for the first like 10 to 15% and then drain at a more reasonable pace for the remaining battery life. And I can comfortably get through a full day without charging unless I'm doing like a ton of GPSing or playing a lot of games or anything like that. And last note about performance is that I have the Snapdragon variant and I have not used the Exynos one, so I can't really comment on that. So yeah, sorry. Okay, software-wise, this is running One UI 3.0. It's a very recent update, and personally, I really like it. Samsung has done a good job of continually making their software easier on the eyes and easier to use. And if you've used any version of One UI before, this is a pretty good evolution of it. And I also like that they haven't strayed too far from their roots and still offer a ton of features, customizations, and options. If you're like me, sometimes you just get kind of bored of your phone. But I feel like the great thing about Android and Samsung specifically is that they just have so many options for you to play with. Because if you ever get bored of your phone, you can just go digging through the software looking for new features, because there probably are going to be some new ones. And it almost feels like a treasure hunt. Of course, some of those features are going to be gimmicks, but I'd much rather have them and not need them than need them and not have them. And Samsung has promised to have at least 3 years of software updates for this phone. So that's still worse than the iPhones, but it's a start. And last but not least, let's talk about the cameras. And with this huge camera bump, they better be good, right? And I think they are. So we've got a triple camera system with a 108 megapixel f1.8 main camera, 12 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide, 12 megapixel f3.0 periscope, 5x optical zoom lens, and a 10 megapixel f2.2 selfie cam. And I feel like these are really great smartphone cameras, but they aren't perfect. So first of all, there is a noticeable shutter lag. Like the time between you pressing the shutter button and the camera actually taking the picture is pretty significant and will probably be pretty annoying if you're trying to photograph some fast moving subjects. The bokeh, like the out of focus background blur, has this weird like smeared grease look to it that I'm really not a fan of. It's hard to explain, but you can kind of tell what I'm talking about, especially like when you get close to a subject and start taking macro shots. And you still get that typical like Samsung skin smoothing that you just can't turn off. But other than that, it performs well in all kinds of conditions and surprisingly well in low light. The main sensor is noticeably better than the other cameras, but I feel like the wide angle camera on this phone is much closer to the main camera in terms of quality than other phones I've tried. The periscope zoom lens is decent, but I definitely would not use that 50 times zoom feature. It's crazy soft, and I feel like it's not really practical for pretty much anything. One thing I think is pretty cool though is that once you get past about 20 times zoom, you'll get a preview of the wider angle. That way framing up your shot is much easier than if you didn't have it. Overall though, you still get that typical Samsung look, which depending on who you are could be a good or bad thing. I think objectively speaking though, it's a pretty good system and is pretty reliable for most situations. For video quality, I think the cameras are okay and will get the job done. But you definitely can do better if you're looking for the best smartphone video. You actually can smoothly switch between the lenses while you're taking a video, but it only works sometimes. The image stabilization on the main lens is also surprisingly good, and fun fact, you can actually even hear the stabilization system while the camera's off. But like I said, you can definitely do better for a smartphone video, although it will get the job done for most people. But at the end of the day though, do I recommend this phone? And I feel like at the retail price of $1,300, I would definitely say no. Like for that price, you can get pretty much any other phone out there, and I feel like there's just much better value propositions. That being said, this is an incredible phone that gets pretty much everything right. It's got a big, beautiful 120Hz screen, all-day battery life, great build and design, and it's 5G, so you're future-proofing yourself for a pretty good while. And to top it off, a very solid triple camera system. So I feel like if you can find a good deal on this, and Samsung phones usually do go on sale at some point, this is a great phone to get. You're making very few compromises, and that's why this phone is going to be my new daily driver, and it's staying in my pocket. And if you're wondering what happened to my Z Fold 2, I do still have it for now, but there's just a lot of quirks about this phone that I just feel like I can't live with. So I'm switching to a more traditional form factor like the Note 20 Ultra, but I will be coming out with a full comparison between these two phones, so definitely make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that. Until then though, if you still have any questions about the Note 20 Ultra, then just leave it in the comment section down below and I'd be happy to answer it. Remember to smash that like button, and if you enjoy content like this, think about subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss anything. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.